Hello. Assalamu alaikum, Khush Amdeed, and a warm welcome to all our distinguished guests, faculty, and students for the inaugural session of the first International Conference on Architecture titled Pluralism in Architecture of South Asia and Other Regions. This conference is the first in the country to address the aspects of pluralism in architecture. Pluralism, which is most commonly utilized in political philosophy, has many uses, particularly in areas with many ethnic and religious communities. This viewpoint celebrates the rich mosaic of diversity that coexists, overlaps, and impacts the built environment in the South Asian context in particular and other regions in general. Appreciating the examples of communal plurality and its effects on the built environment. Pluralism in architecture is not just a matter of aesthetics. It is a reflection of the inclusive and harmonious coexistence of various cultures and ideologies. It is a reminder that architecture can be a bridge that connects people, transcending borders, languages, and beliefs. I am Akil.
And I am Tayyaba Shahid, students of third year architecture program, Department of Architecture and Planning, NED University, your hosts for this session. On behalf of Department of Architecture and Planning, NED University, we welcome you all to the inaugural session of the conference. In this session, other than the keynote that is in person, we will also have one paper presentation online, followed by a short review and discussion by the session moderator and question answer session at the end. Our audience can join us at the venue and online with Zoom and YouTube live streaming facilitation. I will now invite Sabat Hussain, student of third year architecture, to recite a few verses from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين استقاموا تتنزل عليهم الملائكة تتنزل عليهم الملائكة ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا وأبشروا بالجنة التي كنتم توعدون نحن أولياؤكم في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ولكم فيها ما تشتهي أنفسكم ولكم فيها ما تدعون ومن أحسن قولا دعا من دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا قال صدق الله.
Jazakallah Subhat. Now, I would request the audience to please stand for the national anthem. Please be seated. Thank you. I will now invite the chairperson of the Department of Architecture and Planning, Professor Dr. Anila Naeem, to give her welcome address.
Assalamu alaikum. Honorable guests, distinguished speakers, panelists, colleagues, and students. On behalf of the Department of Architecture and Planning, NED University, and the organizing committee of the first International Conference on Architecture, History, Theory, and Practice, I am pleased to welcome you all for an enthusiastic participation in the deliberations that are scheduled to take place during the 2 days conference program. The discussions during this inaugural session and 3 technical sessions tomorrow will revolve around the theme Pluralism in Architecture of South Asia and Other Regions, focusing on a diverse range of approaches and issues addressing the challenges of teaching, theorizing, and practicing the synthesized application of knowledge on architecture towards creating more meaningful built environments. With this year's conference, our department is venturing to launch the launch of a new dimension to the annual conferences we have been organizing since past 6 years, addressing the issues of urban and regional planning. The seeds for the idea inviting intellectual and academic debates on architecture were sown back in 2013 when the first history conference took place in October that year on the theme of history, pedagogy, and scholarship. This conference was an initiative of the history group established in 2007 by our faculty members involved in teaching history-related courses, spearheaded by architect Faria Amjad Ubaid and sustained over the years through the efforts of architects Sara Atar Khan, Dr. Rabila Junejo, Dr. Masuma Shakir, Dr. Femida Sheikh, and several others who have from time to time taught history courses to our students. With this launching of a new series, we now aim to organize the Conference on Urban and Regional Planning and the Conference on Architecture in alternate years. In response to this year's call for papers, 21 abstracts were received, of which 14 were shortlisted for inviting full papers, and after the peer review process, 11 papers are included in the conference program. In addition, the keynote and an invited paper, and of course, inputs from the esteemed panelists will further add much valuable content to the conference discussions. We also plan to publish a volume of the Journal of Architecture and Planning dedicated to this conference and its presented papers within the next 2 to 3 months after going through the required editorial process. Keeping in line with our annual conference format of past couple of years, we have again opted for a hybrid mode that allows us the possibility to include scholars and participants both physically as well as online. Using parallel live streaming of all the sessions, we are aiming to ensure a larger outreach and global connectivity throughout the conference. Once again, on behalf of CARCH 2023 organizing team, I am pleased to welcome our learned speakers, esteemed panelists, and all the honorable guests at the venue and connected online, encouraging an enthusiastic participation, contributing to the discussions. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Anina, for your welcome address. For the keynote address titled Negotiating Architectural Fraternity and Change, I will invite our esteemed guest from Ankara, Turkey, Professor Dr. Suna Govin. Dr. Govin is an architectural historian born in Cyprus and has been teaching at Middle East Technical University in Ankara, Turkey since 1985. She is one of the founders of the graduate program in History of Architecture, where she was a head for nearly a decade. Educated at Wellesley College and Cornell University in the USA, she has participated in several archaeological excavations, both at home and abroad. She has also been a board member of the Society of Architectural Historians in USA. During the last 30 years, she has delivered many papers and public talks in Turkey, Cyprus, and the USA. Her recent publications are on issues of memory, acculturation, spatial representation, and historiographic issues of perception. Now, I request Dr. Govin to start her presentation.
So you will advance the slides, right? Forward is okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear guests and esteemed guests from the Turkey representative. Thank you very much. I am honored to be here this afternoon. So, yes, okay. Well, this is not moving. Okay. On a gloomy, downcast day earlier this year in February, several thousand people flowed into the open space in front of Lala Mustafa Pasha Mosque in the port city of Famagusta, Gazi Mausa, in the northern part of Cyprus, the Turkish part, and more kept coming. People not only from Famagusta, but also other towns and villages from all over the country were continuously pouring in from every street leading to the religious building in the center of the old town. Eyes were teary, and the air was heavy like lead. Despite the enormous shuffling and moving crowd, no talking was heard, the only sound being that of intermittent muffled sobs and silent crying. For the casual onlooker, the resplendent, soaring, vertical Gothic facade with a telltale rose window, finely carved triple portals, towers above the aisles, and tracered gables might suggest a locale in France or somewhere in Europe, as described in her survey book. Medieval Architecture, published in the renowned Oxford History of Art series, Nicola Coldstream traditionally assigns buildings such as these to a religious culture defined by Christianity. She also adds that this spiritual and rather authoritative style of medieval European architecture, I quote, existed and still exists outside Western Europe, end quote. And her spectacular illustration chosen to make the point, figure 3 on page 13 on the screen, is no other than the former Latin Cathedral of St. Nicholas, now Lala Mustafa Pasha Mosque in Famagusta, a seaside town in the easternmost island of the Mediterranean, boasting a prosperous medieval past. So, contrary to what one might expect at first glance, the site on the screen is not in Western Europe, nor are the people gathered there of Christian faith. Needless to say, the religious services and prayers are not to Christian saints either. As the minaret informs, this is a mosque, converted from the 14th century medieval cathedral of St. Nicholas when the Ottomans took hold of Cyprus from the Venetians in the 16th century. While the style and frontal impact of the impressive facade have remained largely the same, liturgical modifications in the interior, which include the addition of features like the mihrab, pale niche in the direction of Mecca, minber, pulpit, and mahfil, private pew, in order to meet the requirements for Islamic worship, were incorporated later. For nearly 5 centuries now, the Islamic function of this former Latin building as a central location of prayer has been in uninterrupted daily use. Inside the church, the vaulted ceiling had once evoked the canopy of heaven for Christians. Today, Muslim men and women in Famagusta continue to pray under the same original green vaulted Gothic ceiling of the converted mosque. What is more, and I would like to emphasize this, they do not appear to have qualms, such as having had to make do with a less than appropriate spatial or functional quality in their current Islamized religious setting. Their non-custom-made space for praying still bears highly conspicuous architectural traces of a Christian religion building type in design and decoration, well known and recognized wherever in the world. By any standard, the physical difference, especially in the outer appearance, which is clearly associated with another religious faith, is hard to miss here. This tolerant attitude toward embracing difference may be clearly attested in the longevity of religious use and still continuing under Islam. Here, I would like to add that brand new mosques built outside the walled city of Famagusta, have not put the older converted mosque of Lala Mustafa Pasha out of use. Elsewhere on the island, too, there are numerous instances where mosques converted from former standing Christian churches continue to be used alongside new constructions. Interestingly, the boom in building new mosques in great scale with multiple minarets in the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus in recent years has not favored modern design like Vedat Dalokai's Faisal Mosque in Islamabad, but a more traditional outlook like the Hala Sultan Mosque in Nicosia. But this involves an agenda beyond the scope of my presentation today. Now, back to the congregated crowd standing patiently in monumentalized solidarity. The people in the crowd are mostly, if not entirely, Turkish Cypriot Muslims. Parents, families, friends, neighbors, citizens, they were all there and united in bidding farewell to the departed souls of the champion basketball team of local pride that tragically perished in the devastating earthquake in southwestern Turkey, where thousands were killed or went missing. Young boys and girls, now collectively known with the affectionate epithet Şampiyon Melekler, champion angels, were in a national tournament accompanied by their coaches and class teachers in southeast Turkey when the earthquake struck. In the early hours of the morning, in only a few seconds, they were buried under the many tons of pulverized rubble from the demolished hotel where they were staying. The infamous Isias Hotel in Adıyaman, Turkey, had crumbled like sand, destroying hopes, visions, and futures for all involved. My aim here is to highlight the significance of place in this poignant but resilient gathering and the setting, because what is unusual in this case is not the communal cohesion itself, but the discrepant setting which became the stage for this cohesion. The agency in this process warrants exploration. So, what does this particular episode signify in architectural history? To begin with, very often in architectural history, we tend to concentrate on segmented analysis, which facilitates definition, classification, and the understanding of salient characteristics in structuring a plausible and sustainable narrative based on facts and rational thinking. Hence, medievalists or Ottomanists studying the Lala Mustafa Pasha Mosque will usually see the building through the lens of their own area of expertise. They will try to identify what is Gothic or Ottoman and the degree of convergence or aberration from the norm that will enable the construction of understandable historiographic narratives. While this is undoubtedly necessary in establishing, clarifying, and confirming individual issues of style and dating, it is a somewhat myopic scholarly endeavor, which tends to obscure underlying issues and continuities. For me, one of the most powerful expressions of architecture resides in the capacity of any building to endure change. Acknowledging this brings a more kinetic vision and expanded ways of viewing architecture than traditional pigeonholed perceptions. Yet, more pluralistic thinking with multifocal lenses is not simply to expect or even hope for Christians and Muslims altruistically living together or building churches next to mosques. It is a mindset that allows the cohabitation of hybrid forms of memory, where there's room to accommodate difference, where change occurs. In the mosque of Lala Mustafa Pasha, that does not exist without the eye-catching presence of the former cathedral. In reverse, the material existence of the cathedral has not disappeared. With its conversion to a function it had not obviously been designed for initially. Needless to say, history is full of examples to the contrary, where mosques and churches have been ruthlessly razed to the ground with the explicit aim of rupture, obliteration, and erasure of everything reminiscent of the bygone era to be replaced by what is desired for the future. Famagusta clearly does not belong in this category of enforced oblivion. On the contrary, what can be observed in the Lala Mustafa Pasha Mosque is an enhancement of physical continuities. If we consider that buildings exist both in the mind as well as on the ground, then the power of architecture in binding memories together and giving them flesh through its materiality becomes apparent. In this sense, architecture has the capacity to act as repositories of memory. Here, I might mention that for the Romans in particular, as indicated in the rhetorical treatise De Oratore of Cicero, training techniques for memorizing speeches involved architectural associations. In other words, orators imagined architectural spaces in compartmentalizing and learning their speeches by heart. Given the power of architecture in shaping experience, it becomes apparent that the intuitive nature of place cannot be adequately understood within the limited frameworks of formal spatial models only. The spirit of the place has to be taken into consideration. And this is where the genius loci, according to Christian Norbert Schultz, is constructed by the combination of meaning, identity, and history. In the solemn congregation, this is no, I want to go back here. I would like to go back. No, it's the
Okay, please, please.
this one. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry for this technical thing. In the solemn congregation of masses of people awaiting the coffins of the champion angels in Famagusta, there are no saints or angels in the literal Christian sense. Yet, the spirituality of dead souls departing from the land of the living in the prime of youth and at the peak of national success pervades the air. Their spirituality merges with that of the Muslim sacred ritual emanating from the converted mosque. The resilient materiality of the building had endured change for several centuries. No, this is... I would like to go back to the facade again. Yes. Thank you. The resilient materiality of the building had endured change for several centuries. While the building itself withstood the ravages of time where it had always been, it was a change in religion and society that grew once again around the same core, when Christian became Muslim. Residents of Famagusta today, including the champion angels, also lived and grew up in the same town, with the center dominated by the majestic architectural presence of the now Lala Mustafa Pasha Mosque. People forget. Memories may also overlap and change over time, but the imprint in the collective consciousness of the unprecedented funeral in Famagusta and the memory of the champion angels become enhanced, in a way immortalized through the continuities that resonate in the resilience of architecture. At this point, I would like to make a dramatic chronological shift and turn the clock back to classical Athens in the 5th century. Oh, this was what I wanted. So now we will continue. No, we go forward. No, to the Erechtheion. Yes. At this point, I would like to make a dramatic chronological shift and turn the clock back to classical Athens in the 5th century BC. On the screen, you are now looking at the site of the Erechtheion on the Acropolis of Athens. As I'm sure you all know from your traditional surveys in architectural history, the Erechtheion is a structure that defies the idealizing design aesthetic of ancient Greek architects, which resides in striving for ever greater perfection and refinement in the correct use of the different orders, Doric and Ionic in particular. From this point of view, the Erechtheion is a temple that looks like no other in the ancient Greek world. In fact, it does not even look like a temple, but rather it seems to consist of a conglomerate accumulation of conspicuously disparate architectural entities derived from and also representing several different temples, shrines, or holy spots. Built entirely in Pentelic marble, the running frieze with gay-colored figures attached to black Eleusinian marble functions as a unifying element. Otherwise, the Ionian style throughout manifests a checkered application with a melange of both freestanding and engaged columns, having no uniformity of overall scale, and which possess miscellaneous dimensions in diameter with variegated surface articulation, all coming together in the same structure. Above all, there's no peristyle. 4 entrances at different levels allow access from the outside, while subterranean corridors facilitate connection between irregular but specific cultic spaces inside. In Greek temple design, normally, the aim is to attain the best elevation, layout, scale, and proportion in traditional architectural elements. At least, that is what I myself and others I know have taught for years. Creativity or originality for its own sake is usually not an issue to pursue for the conservative-minded ancient Greek architect. Along this line of thinking, it is generally claimed that the creative impulse of the architect in the Erechtheion finds a voice through necessity rather than choice. While the ingenuity of the Greek architect in the face of an adverse topography and other difficulties in the design scenario are not to be minimized, this is a rather reductive approach that overlooks the special significance of the building in negotiating afterlives. Unlike the converted mosque of Lala Mustafa Pasha in Famagusta in the medieval period, we may never be able to know the precise nature of the prehistoric or more recent predecessors here, except for sacred locality. Sedimented layers of memory from the Bronze Age or Mycenaean past found an outlet in the built form of the Erechtheion that transcended the past. Through the tactile materiality of architecture, these distant mythological memories came within the range of those living in the classical present to be experienced by them. In this God-filled land, soaked with mythological figures, the challenge of architecture on the site of Erechtheion was to accommodate all by creating bridges between the mortal and the divine. This was where Athena and Poseidon had grappled for the whole of Athens, marks of the trident of Poseidon on the rock, and the sea salt in a well were still to be seen in Roman times, according to Pausanias. Athena's sacred olive tree grew in the sanctuary of Pandrosus, again We learn from Pausanias that the Caryatids on the south porch are carrying what Athena gave them on their heads. While this may seem like a curiosity chest of mythological vignettes thrown together haphazardly, the individual spaces they occupy rise above being neutral relics, acquire a life of their own, and turn into a collective place with character through their extended continuity. My claim is that the legitimacy of the architecture of the Erechtheion lay in the preservation of these memories through architectural fraternity, not only in facilitating, but ensuring their continuity in the present. From the Erechtheion, I would now like to move on to another monument, the Parthenon, which is quite near, both spatially and temporally. Although the Erechtheion and the Parthenon are neighbors on the Acropolis of Athens, I have chosen the two for comparison in order to demonstrate quite opposite responses to links with the past. I realize that I may also be accused of arbitrary selection in highlighting episodes of my choice through a long history of the Acropolis of Athens, but this is on purpose, for the sake of clarity in demonstrating different ways of negotiating with architectural fraternity. My aim is to show how the fusion of the Mycenaean and classical past in the Erechtheion differs from the fission of the classical and post-classical, that is the Byzantine, Frankish, and Ottoman past in the Parthenon as restored and visited by thousands today. What is displayed for the perception of all who go there today is the pristine, polished, and sanitized glory of the classical era. This is an outcome of the surge in patriotism and a process of nation building in Greece after its independence from Ottomans in 1820. And this goes hand in hand with Eurocentric archaeological ideals in positioning Greece within an elevated status in European heritage. Seen from this angle, investing a more conspicuous place of significance for the Parthenon as a quintessential peak of the Doric style in the Periclean era is understandable. But it should not be forgotten that Romans, Byzantines, Franks, and Ottomans were also present in the biographical lineage of the Acropolis, which is not there anymore. On the screen are the engravings and reconstructed views of the Acropolis of Athens from different times of the Ottoman post-classical era. Minarets are there. You can't see them today. A mosque constructed during the late 17th or early 18th century can be seen within the cella, for example. This was also used as a museum, but was demolished during the clearance of the Acropolis. Within the current archaeological landscaping, it so appears that there's no intention nor any desire to provide a panorama with multiple pasts via the site of the Parthenon in the long history of the Acropolis. Hence, in contrast to Erechtheion, where ethereal distant pasts are fused and brought together in a unique architectural solution, the architecture of the Parthenon rises above deliberately erased pasts with unchallenged splendor. What the Parthenon may be for the Greeks on a scale of universal archaeological heritage, the Resgestai, sometimes known as the Queen of Inscriptions, may be said to be the same for the Romans. It is the only surviving document about the deeds of the first Roman Emperor Augustus, written from his own mouth in the first person. There's no surviving copy in Rome for this significant document where one would expect it to be. The important document of universal significance, due to its being a testimony pertaining to the foundation of the empire that once ruled over the Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, is found inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Augustus in Ankara, Turkey, on the place. The next, please. There is a copy in Latin at the entrance of the temple and a Greek version along the south facade. And we know that there were once a copy inscribed at the entrance of the Mausoleum of Augustus in Rome, only because the Latin inscription here in Ankara says so. Very significant. So the Temple of Augustus in Ankara and its precinct is a third monument I would like to show you, as you see on this stamp on the owner of the temple. Unlike the conversion of Lala Mustafa Pasha Mosque, the fused hybridity of the erection or the deliberate erasure on the restored Parthenon, the site of the Temple of Augustus in Ankara reveals an extraordinary instance of in situ remains, where one can see the transparent chronological layering of the extant heritage. This is a precinct where the Temple of Augustus and the mosque and turbe of Hacı Bayram Veli stand side by side. In the religious life of Ankara today, funerals and daily prayer bring sizable crowds to the area, especially on Fridays. Worshippers coming to the mosque intermingle with local and foreign visitors to the temple. And if you look to the bottom, sorry, we should stay where we are. If you look at the bottom on the Acropolis of Athens, there's none of the Ottomans. I mean, it is in dotted lines, but in Ankara, every layer is present there. Without doubt, the degree of material continuity involving more than one culture impregnates the site in Ankara with the evidence of human experience from the Phrygian, Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman to the present, all in the same location, which points to an uninterrupted holy era. In Athens, in the Acropolis, it's only the desired classical era. All the rest is wiped out. Conversion of the pagan temple to the Byzantine church, like the case of the Latin Lusignan to the Islamic in the La Mustafa Pasha Mosque, extended the religious use of the building. Latticed arch windows were carved out of the south wall. The paving of the cella was removed and lowered, while the back wall was extended to create a congregational space. Inscribed crosses were believed to keep away demons lurking in the walls. Religious occupation in the same location continued in the form of Islamic worship when an Ivan, an underground chamber for seclusion, were added after conversion to a madrasah in the early Ottoman period. In the first quarter of the 15th century, the mosque of Hacı Bayram Veli was built next to the Temple of Augustus. Although the temple is now an archaeological ruin, what is preserved declares an outstanding marriage of different pasts, especially through the physical contact of its northeast wall with the mosque. I mean, here I would like to say that there is an architectural kiss between the pagan and the Islamic in the current times. Next. The Muslim worshippers spilled outside the mosque here on the screen are neither resisting nor antagonistic to the pagan monument right before them, which was also once a Christian basilica. But they are not embracing it either. Then are they tolerating it? It would be correct to say that they are largely oblivious. However, this does not change the fact that whether conscious or not, the pagan temple is always in their field of vision. No view of the mosque in this direction is possible without the pagan monument in the background or in the vicinity. On a final note, I would like to reiterate that time and memory become visible through architecture. In this respect, buildings are larger than standing walls. In the billboards announcing concerts on the occasion of commemorating Atatürk on the screen, no picture of Atatürk is to be seen. Anıtkabir, the mausoleum of Atatürk, looms in the background of the posters, even though the venue for the concerts is not there, but in a park nearby. The mausoleum here is not a place where Atatürk is put to eternal rest, but a living space through which he continues to live on through the architectural experience of the visitors at multiple levels. Visitors to Anıtkabir, including families with their children and students of every age, can be seen there every day of the year. Crowds reach unprecedented numbers on commemorative days. On the 29th of October this year, on the centennial of the foundation of the Republic of Turkey, the record for a single day exceeded 1,400,000 people. All came waving their flags entirely on their own accord with no official ceremony. Oscar Niemeyer once said, I quote, "Let me tell you frankly, life is more important than architecture. What really counts is to build a better world." I think that architecture is only a profession, end quote. Niemeyer's prognosis based on praxis may be taken much further through the history of architecture. If we realize that nothing is more consistent than change, the fraternity of architecture in negotiating capricious borders may enable more widespread utilization of pluralistic outlooks that can navigate along continuities between past, present, and future. This is not altruistic rhetoric. An ability to see through afterlives in architectural production will save traces of past architecture from becoming static entities frozen in the past, but as part of an ongoing evolution or continuing architectural experience in the present. Victor Hugo, in his Notre Dame of Paris, says that the book will kill the building. This was when the printing press, came into, function. The writing had more power. And Victor Hugo felt that architecture was the writing of humanity. I think architecture is still the writing of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Suna Govind, for your insights as a keynote on the plurality in architecture and how many fascinating directions it can take. It was a delightful presentation. We now invite our guest of honor for the afternoon, Chairman Sindh HEC Professor Dr. S.M. Tariq Rafi, for his address. Professor Dr. Rafi is a prominent academic and educational leader who was appointed as the chairman of Sindh Higher Education Commission. In this role, he assumes the responsibility of overseeing and guiding higher education initiatives and policies in Sindh. With a strong background in education and a commitment to improving the quality of higher education, Dr. Rafi's appointment as chairman of Sindh HEC signifies a significant step towards advancing educational opportunities and standards in the region. His leadership and vision are expected to have a positive impact on the development of higher education institutions and research in Sindh. Now, I request Dr. Tariq Rafi to start his presentation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmadu wa nusalli ala Rasulil Kareem. His Excellency, Consul General of brother country, Turkey, Madam, our visiting guests from Turkey. I'm really happy to be here for this topic of pluralism in architecture of Southeast Asia and others. It was a very learning presentation that what I have learned from your presentation, madam. And this shows the effect of different cultures in Southeast Asia, which have been living together for centuries. And the effect has been seen in the architecture of different areas in the subcontinent, along with in Turkey and others. Subcontinent had a great influence from the invaders from the Central Asia and from those who have been here, from the Arab countries, those who have migrated from there. So the architecture here in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka is also a testament of a pluralism that we see in this country. And this is a great testament of all the culture and the tolerance that we have among the communities who are living here. I'm not an architect, so I could speak much more about it, but I'm really happy to be here. And I never knew I had to make a presentation. If I had known that, I would have asked some architect to put it down something for me. But I'm a doctor. So if you ask me to talk about medicine, I can do that even without preparation. But if you ask me to talk about architecture, it will be a very difficult topic for me to talk about. But definitely, living in a world where we see pluralism not only in the form of architecture, but we see pluralism in this area. And there's a great influence from our brotherly countries like from Turkey in the architecture in Pakistan. And we who are regular visitors to brotherly country, Turkey, we see a lot of commonalities between the architecture of the subcontinent, Pakistan and Turkey. I wish success to the audience and wish success to the organizers of this conference, and I hope this conference goes a long way in bringing about a collaboration between the brotherly country, Turkey and Pakistan, especially the NED University with the university in Turkey. I'm really grateful for all of you for inviting me over here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dr. S.M. Tariq Rafi, for gracing the occasion with your presence and sharing with us your enlightening words. Now, I would like to invite our chief guest for the afternoon, His Excellency, Mr. Jamal Sangu, the Consul General of Turkey in Karachi, to say a few words. Mr. Sangu was born in 1960 in Kars. He completed his primary, secondary, and high school education in Kars and graduated from Ankara Hacettepe University in 1988. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1988. In addition to various departments in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he worked in the Turkish missions abroad in Dhaka, Jakarta, Rome, Nur Sultan, Marseille, and in Dublin, respectively. He has been serving as a Consul General of the Republic of Turkey in Karachi since December 2021. Now, I request Dr. Jamal to come on stage.
In fact, I'm not prepared to make a speech today here. So I'd like to thank my dear brother, Professor Lavash, the President of the Senate Higher Education Commission, our guest Professor Sultan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon. As I said, I'm not really prepared to make a speech here, so it is really a pleasure to make a small speech to a distinguished audience, the students, the academics, and the guests. As my brothers mentioned, that we are not architect talking about architect, but we know we are living on earth from the early human settlements. You know, the human beings, they created some place to live it. So from the caves to the they built in on the mountains, on stones, and also on the medieval age, later on to our modern time. So we are very lucky to be on the Turkish peninsula. Today's Turkey, we have a mixture of architecture from, as Professor, our guest from Turkey mentioned, we have several historical architectural buildings over there from Greek, from Byzantium, Ottoman Empire, from Selçuk Empire as well. So it is, we have, as in northern Cyprus, we have the Lala Pasha Mosque. It used to be a cathedral. Now we are using as mosque. We have several places in Turkey. They used to be a cathedral church, but they now are used as a mosque. So people those buildings according to the rules. In fact, it's a great idea to leave them empty, than to use them for buildings. So we have one of the earliest mosque, earliest church. It was totally destroyed, but later on the Turkish government restored, and then it during Ottoman Empire it used as also as a mosque in Iznik. It is one of the earliest church over there. So people on the one side they are praying over there doing the namaz. On the other side, the Christians they go and then they put candle over there and then they pray for the same God. So pluralism in architecture is very important, as our dear guest mentioned. So I would like to congratulate for organizing this event, my dear brother, and then I wish success. And then I'm sure that you will have a excellent, fruitful discussions. And this is going to be the first. It's going to be a traditional one. Second, third one is going to be on. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.
Sir, it was an honor to have you for this academic endeavor. Thank you for making time for the conference. I will now invite esteemed Professor Dr. Saroj Hashmat Lodi to give his presiding remarks. Dr. Saroj Hashmat Lodi is a Vice Chancellor, NED University of Engineering and Technology, and has served as Dean and Chairperson in Civil Engineering, NED UAT, prior to this. Dr. Lodi's research work is well published in peer-reviewed international journals, presented in numerous national and international conferences. His research contribution was acknowledged by the university and awarded Research Excellence Award by NED University, Syndicate and Gold Medal by the NED University Teachers Association in November 2016. In March 2019, Presidential Award for Pride of Performance was conferred to Dr. Saroj Hashmat Lodi to recognize his services in field of education, particularly in field of civil engineering. Dr. Lodi, we welcome you to give your presiding remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. His Excellency Dr. Jamal Sanghu, Dr. Tariq Rafi, Dr. Noman Ahmed, Dr. Anila, Professor Goan, respected audience, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. I always feel very awkward coming to architecture department, you know. Born and raised as an engineer with a very deterministic mind, and you come across people where everything is gray. You know, and I remember when I had a very difficult time, I was assigned a responsibility to head the Department of Architecture while Dr. Numan was away for a while. And I had no idea how architecture is taught. To me, teaching has only one method. Put everybody in one classroom lock all the doors and the windows. Nobody's allowed to move out, look outside, and everybody must copy what I've written there. That's the kind of pedagogy that I'm used to. And there I was in the middle of a studio where everybody was eating, talking, sitting on the floor, doing some work. There was no time for the class. But then it was an eye-opening experience for me that there are several ways of learning. The way I know is probably not the best way to learn. There are better ways to learn things. So whenever I come to architecture and meet architects, there's always some new learning. Always. I can bet on it. Every time I interact with the colleagues and friends and students of architecture, they give me a new lesson. And obviously, pluralism is something that is also very important in the society. Pluralism is about inclusion. Pluralism is about learning how others do things, the way I learned how architecture is taught. Learning the behavior, learning the thought processes. But above all, pluralism is all about tolerance also. You can only accommodate other culture, other thoughts, other religions, other customs, if you have the tolerance to do that. And in a society like ours, unfortunately, which is where we are not only divided, but we have built sky-high steel walls so that nobody interacts with everybody. I think this is a wonderful topic to speak about. And even though I was dozing off from time to time during your speech, to be very honest, but it was very interesting also. It's about the lesson, how people treat and respect their buildings and infrastructure. But at the end of the day, it's all about tolerance. And I was a little disturbed that when it comes to tolerance, and there is a very thin line between tolerance and ignorance. And today we were very ignorant when it came to the national anthem of Pakistan. This was disrespectful. When there is a norm, there is a standard music, wording, duration, the instruments that are used in the national anthem, this shows nothing but respect. And I was really embarrassed to hear a remix. And here we are talking about inclusion, which is nothing but respecting others and respecting our own nation. I think we must, especially for our kids, for a younger generation, where we are teaching them lesson of pluralism, we must also teach the lesson of respect. And we should not be disrespectful to our own selves. So, sir, I apologize on behalf of the university for making such a big mess, but it should not have happened. And I'm sure Dr. Noman will take note of it. In the end, it's really good to see everybody here, especially in a very famous building of Karachi. The Beach Luxury Hotel was established before the establishment of Pakistan. I think this hall remained as it is. I have very fond memories of this hall. I've performed this in this hall when I was a student of nursery class, at the very stage, I think. So it's been here for almost 55 years, but established. So, they've been able to maintain the ambience and the decor that was initially there. But at the end of the day, as we respect our buildings, as we respect our people, as we respect others, as we respect culture, we are talking about respecting culture, we must also respect our national anthem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sarosh. And I agree that tolerance also means respect. And I think coexistence and cohabitation also stems from the idea of respect. And nothing can go beyond that. You need to respect and acknowledge and then go beyond. We are sort of cutting the session a little bit. We'll have the paper presentation slightly later. We're going for a souvenir distribution to our guests and dignitaries. So I would like to, for the souvenir distribution, I would like to call Professor Dr. Numan Ahmed, Dean, Architecture and Sciences, NED University, and Professor Dr. Anila Nain, Chairperson, Department of Architecture, NED University, to please give away the souvenirs. I need to put this on. I can't read without it. Okay, so first of all, I would like to call our chief guest, Mr. Jamal Sangu, from His Excellency, Mr. Jamal Sangu, the Council Journal of Turkey.
Thank you, Ujjwal. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Now, I would like to call our guest of honor, Professor Dr. S.M. Tariq Rafi, Chairman Sindh HEC. I would like to now call our keynote speaker, Hojam, Professor Dr. Suna Güven from Turkey, Ankara. And now I'll call Professor Dr. Sarosh Hashmat Lodi, Vice Chancellor, NED University, to please receive that. I do this correction every time. This is not my script. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Dr. Numan. Thank you, Dr. Anila, to do that. We will be continuing with the session. So you have to wait before tea, and I'll leave. And the girls will come in and announce our next speaker. Some of our dignitaries had to leave. Thank all of you to make time for this inaugural session.
We now move on to our paper presentation for the session that is online by Professor Dr. Stefan Predins. He would present on the topic Pluralism in Indian Ocean Cultures, Islamic Architecture in the Maldives. Dr. Stefan Predins is an archaeologist and professor of Islamic art and architecture and the lead of the Indian Ocean Program at AKU ISMC in London. Dr. Predins is also a UNESCO World Monument Fund and Google Arts expert for the Indian Ocean region. He is an associate researcher to the National Center for Scientific Research. Okay. We'll take a break from here. Dr. Stefan Pradines is an archaeologist and professor of Islamic art and architecture and the lead of the Indian Ocean program at AKU ISMC in London. Dr. Pradines is also an associate researcher to the National Center for Scientific Research in Paris, Orient and Mediterranean, Atlas of the Medieval Ports program. He was the director of the excavations of the walls of Cairo in Egypt and excavations in the Indian Ocean in Maldives and East Africa, Gedi in Kenya, Kilwa, and Mafia in Tanzania, Mayoti in Comoros. He is now in charge of the excavations of the Lahore Fort, Pakistan. His latest books are historic mosques in sub-Saharan Africa, from Timbuktu to Zanzibar, and Muslim cultures of the Indian Ocean. He is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Material Cultures in the Muslim World. Now I request Dr. Pradines to start his presentation.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Thank you, Sarah, and I would like to thank very much your professor, Professor Nila Naim, and you, Sarah, for organizing this great conference. So what I will do, I will share my screen with you. And normally I should be in full screen. Is it okay for you? You can see my screen? Is it okay? Is it okay? So I will continue. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Okay. So my paper today will be about Maldivian mosque in the Indian Ocean. So Maldives archipelago is located to the southwest of India in the Indian Ocean. The Maldives is made of atolls or group of 1,196 islands, and 200 of them are inhabited. The Maldives has between 180 and 200 khutbah or Friday mosque, which is equate approximately to one mosque per island. Except for 2 or 3 examples, the Maldivian mosques do not have minarets. The mosques are not oriented strictly toward Mecca, as it is a norm, normally in Islam, with the Qibla wall turned to Mecca. And Maldivian mosques do not have a niche for the mihrab, and sometimes not even a mihrab at all, which is, of course, very unusual for a mosque. However, this uniqueness and best features of Maldivian mosque are probably their building material, the sea coral. So just a few words about historical context about Maldivian mosque. The Maldives, and the Maldives in general, the Maldives was predominantly a Buddhist region before the advent of Islam. The first settlers in the Maldives were migrants who came from Kerala between the 5th and 4th century BC. These migrants were followed by people from Sri Lanka. Buddhism arrived in Sri Lanka around 250 BC and probably was in the Maldives around 200 BC. Buddhism was firmly established in the Maldives between the 1st and the 2nd century of our era. These archaeological observations are confirmed by linguistic and the toponymy of some islands, which retain some words and vocabulary related to Buddhism. It is probable that Islam was introduced to the Maldives by merchants coming from the Malabar coast between the 7th and the 8th century. The Maldives are mentioned in 850 in the Akbar al-Sin wa al-Hind, And one scholar, Abu al-Shirafi, mentioned the islands in 980. Later, in 1154, the famous geographer Al-Idrisi spoke about the Jadibat. But it was only until the 12th century that Islam became the main religion of the Maldives. According to tradition, Maldivians converted to Islam in 1153, but the earliest non-Arabic script dates from 1337. And it is possible to see that the process of conversion to Islam have taken much more longer time than it was described in the local chronicles. For example, in the 17th century, in 1652, some firmans were issued to tax non-Muslims. Two primary sources date the conversion of the last Buddhist Raja or king as being in the 12th century, 1153. The first mention in primary sources of the Maldivian mosque and Maldivian architecture can be found in the travel of the Hela of Ibn Battuta. The Moroccan traveler and geographer visited the archipelago between 1343 and 1346. Ibn Battuta mentioned that the first Sultan of the Maldives converted to Islam after having seen the miracle of a Maghrebi North African preacher, Yusuf Abu al-Barakat al-Barbari. Ibn Battuta explained that the people raised their building above the ground and they were experts in stone dressing, in stone carving. The city broke the idols, raised the temples to the ground, and adopted Islam. According to the previous research, the Buddhist shrines were destroyed and adapted for Islamic use. One British archaeologist, Bell, mentioned that a monk residence, a Buddhist monk residence, was destroyed and the foundation were converted to a mosque during the 12th century. The process of adapting Buddhist religious buildings for use as mosque was respread through the Maldives. The same archaeologist, Bell, also observed that Buddhist architectural designs in various mosques in Malé were probably the proof that, in fact, the actual mosques were reused Buddhist monuments. The second mention to the conversion to Islam can be found in the Maldivian chronicles from the 18th century that recount the story of the conversion of a Raja who followed a Persian preacher from Tabriz. This king took the title of Sultan in 1141, roughly the same date, mid-12th century. The new Sultan sent messengers to convert all the people of the Maldivian island and built mosques on each island. The conversion to Islam is credited to a Turkish Sufi called Yusuf Shams al-Din al-Tabrizi. According to two French scholars, Ludwicalus and Claude Guillot, it is still the same, probably the same Yusuf mentioned previously, but with a different title, Nisba. So most probably the same man. During the 15th and the 16th century, the story of the Islamization changed to take account of the influence of the Rumi school and new Muslim influences. The Nisba of Yusuf was changed for Al-Tabrizi. The first accurate description of Maldivian mosque date actually from European travelers in 1529 with the French traveler called Parmentier, who described some stone coral mosque and later on, between 1602 and 1607, the French sailor Pirard de Laval described the mosque in the capital city of Malé. And this mosque, according to him, were located within large squares surrounded by tombs and wells with steps. During the 9th century, Islam, as I said, spread very slowly in the Maldives. And this Islamization in the Maldives Islands, where in fact the Islamization was connected to major trade routes from East Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, Oman, the Gulf, and also Central Asia and so Southeast Asia. Another factor that made Islam popular in the Maldives and the traders was the Sufism, the mystical path in Islam. During the 11th and 12th century, most of the Muslims converted to Islam in the Maldives were Sufi or affiliated to Tariqa or Sufi Brotherhood. Sufism started to gain popularity in these regions because of its similarity with Indian mystical traditions. It was a familiar aspect for people who had Hindu or Buddhist background. There were texts produced during that period, that drew parallels between Indian mysticism and Muslim mysticism, especially in Bengal and Java. Islam went through three main phases in the Maldives and the adoption by the Maldivians. These three main stages of adoption of Islam are early contact, localization, and reform. During the early stage of spread of Islam, early contact, we can see very limited and early conversions, especially from the rulers, the princes, and also the merchants and traders. So during the second phase of Islamization, there were more conversions and the religion transformation to fit to local needs of the population and perception. So basically an adaptation of Islam and Islamic practices to local traditions, especially with a strong Buddhist background. And the third phase of Islamization, it was when the Muslim community became aware of the gap between the localized Islam in the Maldives and the origin of Islamic tradition. During this phase is dated in the Maldives between the 16th and the 19th century, we can see a massive conversion to Islam and an uniformization of the Muslim society. So about our project. I started to work in the Maldives in November 2017. We started a project with the Aga Khan University in partnership with the Heritage Department of the Maldives and the Maldivian National Defense Forces, with the support of Max van der Shem Foundation and the UNESCO in New Delhi. One of the major questions that we had was to question the continuity of settlements from pre-Islamic cultures and influences from Buddhist architectural tradition on local Islamic architecture. So to investigate, this continuity or discontinuity between Buddhism and Islam, we chose two sites. The first one was the Fandiari Mosque and Kuaganu Cemetery on Ulumedu town in Adu Atoll. And the second site was the Friday Mosque of Fenfushi on Alifu Dalu Atoll. So first, a very brief description of this Maldivian mosque, not only the two that we investigated. One striking feature of the Maldivian mosque, it is most probably first the plan. As I mentioned previously, the mosques are turned to the north and not to the direction of Mecca with the Qibla. And also they are very small and square building raised on a podium, a platform, very similar to what we have in a Buddhist architectural tradition. Yes, and as you can see in the Great Mosque of Malé, these mosques are decorated with painted ceilings and turned wood, painted wood and turned wood. And according to the local tradition, the decoration of this mosque inside the mosque started with the Sultan Iskandar between the 17th and the 18th century, started with the capital city of Malé, and then what spread to the other islands. And it would explain also why most of these Maldivian mosques have the same decoration inside. So basically, even older mosques were refurbished during the 17th and 18th century by the famous Sultan Iskandar. Another element substitutes the case of two periods in the story of ancient Maldivian mosque. So between the early Maldivian mosque of the 12th century and the refurbishment of the 17th and 18th century is the fact that these mosques were also decorated from the outside, as you will see here, for example, on this picture, of another mosque in the great capital city of Mali, the Eid Mosque. You can see the base of the mosque, the podium of the mosque is decorated with very fine sculptures. These sculptures, here you can see also some pictures of this mosque. This is from the book of my colleague Moruf Jamel. These sculptures are extremely interesting because they are made, of course, of fresh coral stone, sea coral, and the repertoire of these sculptures, as I will come back on that later, is mainly drawn from northern India and the Gujarat from Kambai. And it's very interesting to see the influence, the late influence of Indian architecture in the decoration of this Maldivian mosque. So most probably between the 17th and 18th century. So yes, in the tradition, the first great mosque, the Ukuru Miskit Friday Mosque, was founded in 1153, but then was restored in the 14th century in 1337, and then was enlarged and restored again by the famous Sultan Ibrahim Iskandar in 1656, so in the 17th century. So you can see already, even in the tradition or in the epigraphy or in the local history, we have mention of different periods in the history of this Maldivian mosque. And of course, we were interested not only by the history of this Maldivian mosque, but also by the early history of this Islamic architecture to understand if these mosques were built on Buddhist temple or built with reused elements from a Buddhist temple. Here you can see another mosque from the Ra Atoll. It's a mosque of Medu Island. This mosque, according to the tradition, was built in 1705, but actually the mosque is much older. It's a refurbishment of the mosque, which is from 1705. And you can see here that the base of the mosque, the podium or the platform is very simple with no intricate decorations, as you can see previously. Why? Because most probably the mosque was not refurbished and decorated from the outside as a mosque in the capital city of Mali. You can see another mosque with a simple podium here. It's a mosque of Isdu Island from the Lamu Atoll, sorry. Again, with a later date of 1701, but for the refurbishment inside the mosque with lacquered wood, red painted wood that you saw previously in Mali. According to my colleague Moruf Jamel, the Isdu and Medu Mosque are the oldest mosque in the Maldives Island. Why? Because according to him, both of them have an undecorated podium. And I agree most of the time with my dear colleague and friend Jamel Moruf, but on this particular point, I disagree with him. And I think that in fact, these mosques are not older than the other mosques, but they haven't been restored and decorated later in the 17th and 18th century. It's the reason why they kept, this kind of archaic style. Here you can see the entrance of this mosque. And again, for those who are familiar with Buddhist temples and architecture, you can see that the entrance of this mosque is very similar to Buddhist temple, as I will show you later. If we move to another mosque, the mosque of Ivandu, you can see that here that the mosque was decorated, especially the podium, with intricate carved decorations. And in this particular mosque, what is very interesting is that we saw some undecorated parts in the podium, especially at the back. And it's extremely interesting. Why? Because it shows that, in fact, the decoration was unfinished. So most probably during the 17th and 18th century, people started to carve, the podium of the mosque, but for an unknown reason, they didn't finish, the decoration. You can see that the entrance is much intricate and decorated than the previous mosque. We have, of course, another phase, in this mosque with a different kind of pattern for the moldings and the decorations. Inside, we have the same lacquered wood, red wood, painted wood that we have in the other Maldivian mosque, probably dating from the Sultan Iskandar in the 17th century. So if we look at our study case, especially the mosque, we will start with the mosque of Fenfushi. Yes, we started to investigate the Friday Mosque, all Friday Mosque of Fenfushi in November 2017, known also as the Asari Mosque. This is the mosque that you can see in the middle of this plan. It's a square, classic Maldivian mosque, square building surrounded by a compound with a lot of graves and mausoleums. One feature of the Fenfushi Mosque is the what we call plaque mihrab. It is in fact a simple. The mihrab is only represented by a painted piece of wood, carved and with lacquered wood, red and black painted wood, and it's very interesting because this kind of mihrab can be seen in some very early mosques. For example, I'm thinking about the Mosque of Ibn Tulun in Cairo, where you have some plaque mihrab added by the Fatimids in Ibn Tulun, and it's also visible in some mosques in Bahrain, in the Gulf. So, and they are most of the time related to Shia mosque. Of course, it's not the case with the Maldivian mosque. The Maldivians are Sunni Shafi. But actually, in the past, I sincerely believe, and we believe that the first settlers, the first Muslims who arrived in the Maldives were probably Shia. This plaque mihrab is interesting because it shows you something. It shows you that, in fact, the Maldivian mosques were built according to Buddhist traditions. And in the Buddhist tradition, of course, you don't have this niche, you know, of the mihrab turned to Mecca in the middle of the Qibla wall. So by adding a wooden mihrab on this wall, the Maldivians, in a way, consecrated, you know, the building by adding, you know, an Islamic, you know, feature in the middle of the wall, transforming a building who could have been, you know, a Buddhist temple into a mosque with a proper mihrab in the middle of the Qibla wall. Here you can see the prayer room of this Fenfushi Mosque, with most of the small Maldivian mosques have only 4 pillars, sometimes no pillars at all. They are supporting in the middle of the prayer room a small dome or cupola that you can see here, with entry gate carved decorations, painted turn wood, and also painted arabesque, as you can see on the ceiling. One feature of Sushi Mosque is probably one of the most important features. It's a so-called Buddhist bathing tank. And according to the tradition, not the tradition really the local tradition, but the tradition according to the literature, especially Bell and other scholars, this could have been a Buddhist bathing tank that have been reused, you know, close to the Friday Mosque when the place was Islamized. And in fact, according to our archaeological excavations and also the time that we spent, you know, to collect, you know, oral traditions among the local population, this is not a Buddhist bathing tank. Actually, the tank was built by one of the sultan of the island to benefit to the local population. It was built by the Sultan Mohammed Devadu in the late 17th, early 18th century as a royal gift to support the community and to provide fresh water for the inhabitants of Fenfushi. So it was really not a bathing tank, but it was a water tank for the need of the local population, because to collect, of course, rainwater during the dry season. And it is interesting because this Buddhist water tank was built according to the previous architectural Buddhist tradition. So it's the reason why I think a lot of scholars were mistaken, and they took this water tank for a Buddhist as a Buddhist structure. So it's very interesting to see that it's not only the mosque, but different architectural features were indigenous, local to the population, were built and rebuilt by the population, even during the Islamic period, but following Buddhist and pre-Islamic traditions. We did also some excavations to try to understand if the mosque was built over a Buddhist temple, and it was not the case. We just found the foundation of a previous mosque from the 12th century. So actually, we were able to confirm that at least here, the mosque followed, the historical traditions. So we had a first mosque from the 12th century, and then the mosque was rebuilt in the 17th century and later in the 17th and 18th century. You can see here the foundation of the mosque, and the first row just under the plinth are the foundation, the second foundation of the second mosque. And here we move to the southern part of the Maldives. The last atoll to the south of the Maldives is the atoll of Adu Atoll in the Olomedu Island. And we investigated the Koagono Cemetery, and especially we did some excavations on the Fandiaru Mosque, dated from the end of the 16th century. Here you can see the photo of the Fandiaru Mosque, the best preserved mosque of this compound. You can see that it's quite not unique, but exceptional. This mosque has a minaret. But as you can see here, and it's common also in the Maldives, when Maldivian mosques have a minaret, it's not a minaret, a tower, or a minar or manar, but it's just a flight of steps. And the minaret is not even attached to the mosque. So you have these steps who serve as minaret, and you have the mosque just behind. The mosque here, these mosques are extremely interesting in this compound because they are extremely simple. You don't have even pillars in the mosque. It's just a simple square building, very similar to what we can assimilate, to pre-Islamic architecture and Buddhist temples. You can see the section and the wall of this building. Very small building. Some people ask me about the Muslim communities and community is there. And you have to think that first, in the same compound, you have 5 little small mosques. And most of the time, it was only the important people, the elite, who were praying in the mosque. The rest of the people of the community, they were praying in the compound outside the mosque. So the mosque couldn't accommodate, the whole community of believers. Here you can see, it's in Fenfushi here. It's one characteristic of the Maldivian mosque that I mentioned previously. It's their setting in their urban landscape. So basically, the mosques are always built within the town or the city, and in the middle of a cemetery. So really in the middle, and not outside of as necropolises, so outside of the city. And it is also a tradition, most probably coming from pre-Islamic tradition and Buddhist tradition. I mentioned previously the influence of Gujarat, so from India, and in some tombstone, you can see very intricate, mihrabs and calligraphy, who are Nashki or Nashk, and they are very reminiscent from the Gujarat area. It's also very interesting with the Maldivian mosque, and I think it's a particularity of Indian Ocean architecture, is the use of a specific building material. These mosques are unique because they were built with sea coral. So you can see here Poraitis coral from the sea. These blocks were fished, or just taken, at the low tide from the sea. And for the biggest blocks, they were fished, using ropes, and 2 boats to pull out, the big blocks of coral from the sea, to drag them, on the beach, and to start to cut them and to sculpt them to create, some ashlars and sculptures, for the mosque. Another characteristic of this architecture is what we call dry stone masonry. So basically, Maldivians didn't use mortar for their mosque, but just dry stone techniques. It's interesting because most of these techniques are extremely similar to both building construction. And you can see here probably also another influence from the sea, because Maldivians are sailors. And you can see that this mosque, a lot of this technology probably were taken from boat building construction. Here, the similarities that I mentioned previously, the influences from the Indian Ocean region. So first, we have, of course, a strong influence from, we have very little influence, from southern India. We have a little bit of influence from Malabar and the Kerala buildings, especially for the roof and roofing technique with the carpentry, with the tier or 5 roof. We have a little bit of Indian influences with the wood, and lacquered technique, as you have seen previously, but very little from southern India, Malabar and Kerala. Mainly the influence that we can see on the Maldivian mosque are coming from Buddhist, but also Hinduist building. I will come back on southern India in 1 minute. Here you have a very famous Buddhist temple in Sri Lanka, and in Polo, where is it? Polo Nara, I think. Yes, and this Buddhist temple, as you can see, was built, on a platform, a plinth, and you can see the entrance of the temple is extremely similar to the entrance of the Maldivian mosque that I showed you previously. We have also, I missed, yes, I lost it somewhere, of an Indian temple, Hindu temple, where you can see a lot of similarities with Maldivian mosque. We have also similarities between Maldivian mosque and East African mosque. So here you can see the mihrab, the niche, toward Mecca, the mihrab of the mosque of Sangomnara. The main similarities of that we can see between Maldivian mosque and Swahili African mosque is the use of the same building material, coral stone, and also the design. Well, this design is, of course, entrelace or arabesque, but these entrelace are similar to other Muslim cultures. It's not typical, of course, of Swahili culture. It's really typical of Islamic design, but we have the same pattern in East Africa and the Maldives. Here is the slide that I'm mentioning about this temple in southern India, where we can see very strong similarities with the podium, the platform, and the main entrance. Here we have some designs that we can relate to maybe the Iranian or the Turkic sphere with the tree of life. So we have some design where imported was influence from the Gulf, and or also maybe from Sufi movement from the Gulf. So I'm thinking, of course, about Persia, Iran, and also Turkish schools here. Here you have some designs that I mentioned from Gujarat with this mini niche, or doors, as you can see, sculpted, in the platform of the mihrab. And here we have something more intricate with this kind of vegetal patterns and arabesque, who are especially the one in the middle, the one to the on the molding above are very classic Islamic design, palmette patterns. You have to under a kind of molding who are more kind of Greco-Roman patterns, so very classic. But the one in the middle can be related to this entrelace and arabesque that we have in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia and Malaysia. And now I'm coming to another area of great importance for influence, cultural influence in Maldives. It is Indonesia and Malaysia. I'm thinking first at the role of Malaysia in the trade, in the ocean trade with the Maldives. And you have probably some Malaysian influence with what we call the seal, the Sultan seal, that you have from time to time at the entrance of a Maldivian mosque. Here you have the seal of the mosque of Ivandu. The seal is not always an inscription. From time to time you can read, the name of the Sultan. From time to time it is just Allah or a religious word. It's not like, the Ottoman Togra, with the name of the signature of the Sultan. It is more a magical religious meaning that we have in this seal. They are to protect the mosque and the people in the mosque. It's the reason why you can see these seals, always magical religious seals, always at the entrance of the mosque. And this is something very well known and published, for example, by my colleague Annabelle Gallop about the Malaysian seals from the British Library, sorry. And so these seals are important because they relate to Southeast Asia and Malaysia. Of course, we have Indonesia. We have Indonesia and we have Java and Sumatra. And here I wanted to show you two examples of mosques who are completely connected to their pre-Islamic past. You have the famous Sewang Duru Mosque, where you can see that the gate, the main portal is connected to pre-Islamic traditions with the Naga, the kind of mythical beast who relate to Hindu and Buddhist traditions. And yes. And also you have the roofing techniques that you have, for example, in the Agung Dekmak Mosque in Java, where you have these 2 or 3 roof tier roof. And inside the mosque, you have 3 huge main pillars. And these main pillars are, as rightly noted by Professor I forgot the name of my colleague from Bernard O'Kane from American University in Cairo. These kind of big pillars and are related also to China. And it's interesting to note that despite the fact that 1 or 2 books, I'm thinking about 1 book from a colleague from Edinburgh University, very few books have been published about Islamic architecture in China. And but it's extremely interesting to connect China to the Indian Ocean, because when we think about China, we think always about the Silk Road, and Central Asia. But we have to think about China as one of the main actors of the Indian Ocean trade. And China was very active, and it's the reason why you have also all this Chinese diaspora, between Indonesia and Malaysia. And of course, Chinese architecture influenced also the mosque in the region. And to finish, my presentation today, I wanted to mention one or two, at least one Chinese mosque. Here you have the mosque of Guangzhou, and this mosque is interesting because, like most of the Chinese mosques from the south west coast of China, they are connected to pre-Islamic buildings. So basically Buddhist and Taoist buildings. And you have the roof, the entrance, but also the pillars inside the Chinese mosque who are really related to pre-Islamic religion. So to come back a little bit to the presentation that we had previously from Professor Sunaguven, I totally agree with my Turkish colleague. I think that the role of pre-Islamic cultures in Islamic culture have been not undermined, but most probably ignored for many reasons. They could have been political, they could have been religious, and they could have been just practical, because it's easier to teach, Islamic architecture without mentioning, all these strange example of Islamic architecture. So to come back to the main question that I had, at the very beginning, if these mosques were built, by reusing Buddhist monuments, actually, according to the excavations that we did and the study of the Maldivian architecture, I can answer for now. Of course, I know, and I know few mosques who have been probably built or on Buddhist temples or reusing Buddhist monuments. But generally, most of the Maldivian mosques that we have were not built on Buddhist temples, but they were built according to Buddhist architectural traditions. And I think it's very different and also extremely interesting to see all the people, they kept, their local traditions, and they integrated, all their local traditions within, this broad Islamic culture that we call also, the Mosun mosque. So the mosque, from the wind of the Indian Ocean. And so I wanted to conclude with this few words about something more general. This is not unique to the Indian Ocean. The Great Mosque of Damascus in Syria was built over a Roman temple. Christian churches were built, in Europe. I'm thinking about France or UK. Christian churches were built over Celtic Iron Age funerary mounds or tombs. Spanish churches were built over Aztec or Mayan temples, in Mexico. So what is probably unique in India, the Maldives and Southeast Asia is probably the coexistence of different cultures and religions. Even after the advent of Islam, it is what I call the architectural pluralism of the Indian Ocean. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We now invite our moderator for this session, Dr. Abela Janejo, Assistant Professor, Department of Architecture and Planning, NED University, to initiate a short discussion on the keynote and paper presented and take question and answers from the audience.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Professor Dr. Stefani Pradeens. I'm pronouncing your name like totally wrong, so please forgive me for that. And Professor Dr. Sunagavan, and please correct me and let me know what's the right pronunciation is, because I googled it, I couldn't find it on Google last night. So I'm sorry if it is wrong, but it was a fairly delightful presentation by both the keynote and you, sir. And I think it resonates a lot with what I have been taught, what I have been doing, and probably trying to say, sometimes in an articulate or in an unarticulate manner, through the idea of convergence and divergence of culture, their acceptance, their rejection, the idea of monolithic entities that we have made in our head through our training in architecture, through books, and also I think with connecting the two papers with Dr. Suna Goven and Dr. Pradeen's idea of understanding of mosque architecture, and even for that matter, understanding of a cathedral in those boxes that we are trying to understand them in. And I think those were with your presentation and with the keynote, and I am hoping the presentation tomorrow as well. These are shattered beyond recovering, and I think that's a better way to put it. They should be shattered, they should be unpacked, they should be blown into pieces, and then we need to start reconciling with those pieces again, so that we start rediscovering all of this, still not losing the essence of them, because there are so many layers to it. And I could connect Hujam's Professor Dr. Suna's presentation and your presentation with this one picture that had a minaret. Both had a minaret. One had a minaret in front of a converted mosque that was a Gothic church, and yours had a minaret sort of stepping out of a very Chinese entrance. One of the slides was there, and then our understanding of Islamic is if there is a minaret, it will be Islamic. We understand semiotic markers. Obviously, they have been there for a reason. They were developed there for a reason, but having said that, why do we need to understand Islamic or Gothic or classical or any other through just that one narrow vision? A mosque is essentially a place where you go and you pray. A cathedral is essentially a place where you go and you pray. So that is what in its essence it is. It can take any garb. It can wear any clothing. And that's what architecture is all about, that different cultures, different areas, different identities resonate with this spirituality or the garb of spirituality as well. There are certain things that we sort of were the undercurrents and were talked about as well, the idea of continuities, the idea of cohabitation, the idea of erasure as well. But at the same time, accommodating this difference, sometimes accommodating difference at the cost of sort of overlooking it, turning your back toward it, like the Augustus Temple. Sometimes sort of finding that idea of difference in reconciliation between the Buddhist architecture and the presence of Islam in Maldives. Or I kept on thinking about Quwwat al-Islam Mosque and the copious volumes of scholarship that has been done on it and produced on it, that is Delhi Sultanate or Delhi Sultanate, and the whole idea of the Muslims sort of coming over here and negotiating with the local masons and the local construction methods and trying to make their own spiritual spaces. And that sort of resonates with all of these ideas, the coexistence, the plurality. If you go there, if you look at Quwwat al-Islam Mosque, which was vehemently criticized by certain writers and openly embraced or enthusiastically embraced by certain writers. So there are all these polar views about that single piece of architecture. Similarly, so like, how do you, so the question sort of goes back to our understanding of architecture, that if there is a minaret or there is a mihrab, then it becomes a mosque. And we forget, or a church or anything else for that matter, and we forget that the essence makes the place. We talked about it in the morning as well. And we need to revisit our understanding of the spaces and the places, probably. We also need to understand architecture through the retention of it in the memory, like the reference to Cicero was there in the keynote address, that architecture sort of did that. And Victor Hugo said that it will not remain that because there is printing press, but it does remain that way. It does remain important. It in multiple avenues for multiple kind of people. So yeah, that was that idea. I also want to open the floor to question and answers, if there are any, by both or from both our speakers. If anybody has any question. Okay.
So thank you for your presentation, and I hope this is working. And yes, I think both the presentations that we have from Dr. Sona Goven and as well as from Professor Dr. Stephens reminds me of a few things from our part of the world as well. I think the work of Holly Edwards, Myth in Brick, covers a research her research along the Indus Valley, the Punjab region. And she also talks about influences in multi-religion, having similarities, multi-religious architecture having similarities from one to another. And looking at these various instances, I feel that it's not so much the architecture, but it's actually the context that dictates so many things, in the sense that who is building, and what is the place, the geography, who are the craftspeople who have actually put it together, the people of the place themselves, who may be converts from within the same area, and therefore you see a translation of influences from one religion to another religion. There may be people who have been constructing a particular religious building type, and then that switches. So that kind of translates into another building form, and that's something that we see, and something that Holly Edward also talks about. Also, I think that there has been traditions where conversions in religions have led to a conversion of buildings as well. Like you presented a conversion of a cathedral into a mosque. So that in itself also, kind of carries forward some of those symbolic elements into architecture, that there is a conversion of a building which is religiously of importance and gets converted in so many other places as well, that we find instances in, and people can relate to these elements because buildings are already of a religious nature, and have these sacred elements and character that we see sort of carrying forth. So I think that these are very good researches, and they show a kind of regional continuation between religions, and they do not show a kind of separation from one religion to another, but a kind of continuation. And the idea of pluralism and tolerance is something that we see, of course, coming forth in them. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Masuma. Any other question? Okay, yes, Gania. Yes, Gania.
Assalamu alaikum. So my question is for you, Professor Dr. Guven. You mentioned Christian Norberg Schultz in your lecture, and I was just wondering, like, how do we? And he's a great phenomenologist. So how do we take these studies on phenomenology and bring it to the historical monuments? Because we study history through history is usually taken as a lot of information, and as you said, there are these formal models of studying history, but in phenomenology there is there's a sense of space that you sort of study. So is there a way to bring those studies into sacred spaces, and again to question the idea of sacred? I mean, what is sacred? Because a sacred space in a lot of theories like Mircea Eliade, you cannot separate the sacred from profane. So how do you sort of bring that here?
Is this thing open? Okay. My voice comes more than yours. So thank you for the question. I would like to repeat that it's not walls that make the building, it's people. So as I said this morning, the architectural fraternity is very, very important. And one thing which I did not mention this morning was the brilliant chapter at the time of Spiro Kostov when he talks about the Renaissance. And normally the Renaissance chapter, because it requires specialists, specially trained in that area, is done by a certain group of people. And then you require very different qualifications to study, Ottoman architecture in the same time, in the 16th century, 15th century, for the Ottomans. So when you are studying architect Sinan, you very rarely have a specialist who can compare, both. And in Spiro Kostov's book, there's no separate section for architect Sinan Otoman and for Palladio, but it is one chapter which talks about what is happening in Constantinople, Istanbul, today, and what is happening in Florence. So the Ospedale degli Innocenti, of Brunelleschi in, Florence is given the same space with, Sinan's constructions. And it's all about interaction. So if we can have this kind of an attitude, not to look at, Christian or, Muslim or Gothic or, Islamic, and look in the way Kostov has done to treat, Florence and Constantinople in the same chapter, which is not easy because it takes long years to become an architectural historian, and you need to, understand the Latin and all kinds of other things for, Renaissance architecture, and totally different things for Ottoman. But this is the challenge. If we can do that, then we will come, closer to your question. It's a very difficult question of reorganizing the curriculum so that you have the mental set that will enable you to do the Renaissance and the Ottoman at the same time, or the Christian and the Byzantine at the same time. But ultimately, I would like to repeat the thing that it is the people who make the building, not the buildings. And that's why I mentioned only one sentence about the new mosques in Nicosia. I mean, that's a political thing, and a lot of money is spent to build monumental, grand mosques, not with 1 or 2 minarets, but 6 minarets. But that's not espoused by the people. So when you go to the Friday prayers, go to the Hala Sultan Mosque that I showed, the brand new, spectacular, mosque. It is a carried, congregation. People have to be taken there by buses and so on, because it doesn't have the same meaning like the one I showed, which has the continuity of memory of the place, for Famagusta. So it is the setting. It is the people, and ultimately they will give the meaning. And I very much think that Professor Stefan Platina's comparisons are again espoused by the people. So thank you very much.
Is there any other question? Yes, Tanya, please.
Thank you, Rabila. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Tanya and I'm faculty at NED University. So my question is to Professor Sona. Thank you so much. Through your presentation, we went through a number of projects where we saw, by adopting appropriate conservation strategies, how the abandoned structures were converted into living heritage by collectively saving their shared memory, collective memory. But at the same time, we see a lot of projects such as what's happening in Hagia Sophia at the moment, or what has happened in Kora Museum, where the centuries-old iconography has been completely covered, just in order to accommodate the current function. And yet we see examples like Our Lady Cathedral or the former Cordoba Mosque, where the only smaller area was converted to accommodate new function, and rest of the building sustained its originality, where one could at present see the original Muslim inscriptions and decorations. So I was wondering, while going through all these processes, these buildings lose a lot of memory, a lot of history, and a lot of narration on their originality. And when we were discussing earlier this morning about pluralism in architecture, Professor Lodhi very rightly said that pluralism means accepting, accommodating, and respecting others as well. So talking about all these structures, they are not structures which are just, linked with one specific faith or one specific ethnicity, you can call, but they are processes of, collective collective aspects, be it material, be it the experts who build them or the masons. So I just wanted to, just hear your insight on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. When you mentioned the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, all my antennas, were absolutely raised. And I wish our guest of honor, the Turkish ambassador, was still here because I would like to hear his views about it. I mean, I kept saying in the morning and now as well that it's the people that make a building. But it is not the people who make the decisions. The governments and other agencies make these decisions. And when I talk about the Hagia Sophia, I mean, I teach also Byzantine. I'm a Romanist, but my survey includes, Byzantine. I have one very simple solution for the Hagia Sophia, which should not be a very difficult one. I mean, if we have a universal claim and Hagia Sophia is truly a universal monument, I mean, yes, the Muslim part lived maybe longer than the Christian, part as a mosque. But the Christian part was also very important. And it even goes back to late, Roman, times. So my solution for claiming universal significance for Turkey, for the government of, Turkey. And I would like to say this to the, ambassador, maybe some of you can convey this to him, is to have the bayrams. I mean, the two bayrams are very important. And if people want to have a special bayram prayer, then they can have a quota because the building, I mean, cannot house thousands of people at the same time. But just like going to Mecca, I mean, there are for the Hajj, there are quotas. For Bayram, for the two Bayrams, they have quotas. And it should remain a museum because it is a monument of humanity. And there is an aspect of it, which is a cultural heritage in addition to the worshipping, significance. So it should be a museum, like Atatürk made it into a museum. But on Bayrams, there should be a special quota, and all the Muslims who want to have a special prayer will apply, and they will have their namaz in Hagia Sophia, because it is not an ordinary namaz. I mean, they can have their namaz in one of the hundreds of mosques, but if they want to have their namaz in Hagia Sophia, then they apply and they do it there. With the same, mindset, then there should be a time for Easter, and all the Greek Orthodox people who want to celebrate Easter in Hagia Sophia, they will come and have their Easter sermon there. In the capital of the Byzantine Empire. It was a capital for 1,000 years. And then, I mean, that sounds so simple, but it's also at the same time so impossible. So you would then respect and tolerate. These are very significant words. You would respect Christendom. You would, respect the Islamic, world, but you would also respect the heritage of humanity by keeping it as a, museum. So thank you for your question. It's very dear to my heart.
Okay, so I think we will close the discussion. I have just one question from Dr. Stefani Fradines, that he showed a lot of buildings that were at one, because they were related to Indian Ocean littoral and the maritime food over there. And it sort of, a lot of them echoed Maldives, Buddhist culture, everything, but it also echoed Gujarati carvings as well somewhere. And then Swali details that were coming from Africa, and then other details. So we saw, again, made to understand Islamic in a certain way and in a certain way. How do it, in the grandness of all those paraphernalias, the dome and the which are absent in Maldives, but still, like there wasn't even a mihrab. But how do we make sense of the smaller details and also make them important? Because a larger problem with history of architecture or any historical study is the monumentality and the grandness as well. And these smaller details that mean so much, that actually are talking about the exchanges or the tolerance or I don't know how many other things. How do we make sense of them, and how do we make them important, and how do they merit studying? I think that is my question. How do they become important? Because they are.
Okay. Well, it's complicated because as an archaeologist, you know, I show you previously some pictures of our excavations, but I'm also working like an art historian, so an architectural historian. So what we are doing, we are also doing a lot of building archaeology to see the different phases of construction of a building and so on. And of course, decorations are probably one of the most important things, because decorations are related to different cultures. And so it is less technical than a cultural choice. And it is extremely interesting for art historians or archaeologists to work on the decorations, because they can reveal, you know, different connections, interactivities, and also influences between people. But now, when you said in your question, you ask in your question if they are important, my answer would be they are important, but we have to take care to not make them too important. So basically, it's not because you have one type of decoration that everything has to be from Gujarat or has to be Indian, because the problem is you have, as it was mentioned by Professor Sunagovan, it's the fact that everything is also political. And it is always very difficult to work nowadays, you know, in Indian Ocean cultures, but also Islamic, you know, or Muslim, it's better to say Muslim cultures, without being political. And I remember when I was working, because I worked for many years in East Africa on the Swahili coast, and some young African scholars, they ask me, but you talk about influences, architectural influences. Do you mean that us African, we have nothing? We received everything from the outside, and we were dependent from the outside. And my answer was, of course, no. Africa, especially the Swahili coast, was very active, you know, was a dynamic player, you know, in the Indian Ocean. So why I'm mentioning this example? It's because behind, you know, art history, social sciences, archaeology, you have politics. And it was mentioned again by Suna, the fact that I'm not talking about Turkish politics, of course, but the point is people are using monuments, ideas, and decoration to say what they want or what they have in mind, what are their fears, you know, or their needs, and so on. So for Africa, it was very obvious that because of the colonization period, the colonial period, and because of all the discussions, you know, after the post-colonial period in Africa, some African scholars, especially the young generation, they are very sensitive, you know, to this kind of topic, what we call influence or influences. And from time to time, people are mistaken. It's not because you talk about influences that you are like a diffusionist. So basically, you want to claim that one area was more important than another. And so basically, for example, if for example, the Turkish or the Persian sphere exported, all their cultures to the Maldives. It's not the case. One particular decoration or element can tell you just simply that these places were connected in time, were connected geographically, maybe because some people, they were from a Sufi tariqa or Sufi brotherhood, and they were connected like that, maybe because they were connected commercially, because the Maldives was connected to a place. For example, it could have been Cambay, it could have been, the old city of Bambor, the old Debul, close to Karachi. So these ports and the harbors, they were connected to each other. And of course, people move from one place to another, and they move with their ideas. They move with their, not only with their religion, but they move with their culture. And I think it's another important point that I wanted to mention for the discussion, because when I was looking at the Gothic in Cyprus, at the Gothic facade, of this mosque or cathedral of church, I was thinking at the Gothic, the Mamluk Gothic in Cairo, because I worked for many years, 16 years in Cairo. And you have in Cairo a complex, the Madrasa, it's a Mamluk complex with Al-Ghuri, and you have a beautiful Gothic door. And this Gothic door was not made in Egypt, in Cairo, but was brought back from what we call today the country Israel, was brought back from Akka in Israel by a Mamluk Sultan to Cairo. Why? Because he loved, this Gothic, door, and he took it from a Gothic church, a Gothic cathedral in Akka, and he moved back this door, stone by stone, to Cairo to rebuild it, in his complex. And so I wanted to open, the audience and the people to another point. It's not only about aesthetic. It's not only about religion. I think it's also about aesthetic. You can be Muslim, you can be Christian, but you can love, you can like a style, an idea, and so on. So I wanted just to open the discussion also to respond to your question by a question about aesthetic and meaning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stefani. Friends. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, I apologize. Okay, so now I will call architect Sara Atar Khan, the muscle behind the conference. She is an assistant professor at Department of Architecture and Planning and the convener of the conference, to give her a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Ravella. Good afternoon, all. It's a chill space, so let's bear a little more minutes with me. Thank you is such a prayer that cannot be seen or touched. It must be felt by heart. I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special occasion. Honorable Chief Guest, esteemed guest of honor, worthy Vice Chancellor, respected Dean, dear Chairperson, most valued invited guests, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sara Khan, and on the behalf of Department of Architecture and Planning and my own behalf, I would like to extend a very hearty note of thanks to all speakers for gracing your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinions today. I may like to express my gratitude to our guest of honor, Professor S.M. Tariq Rafi, Chairman, SIN HEC, and the Chief Guest of his occasion, His Highness Mr. Kemal Sango, the Consul General of Turkey. We will ever remain grateful to you, and we thank them for being with us today. Praiseworthy was the presence of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Sarosh Hashmat Lodi, whose graceful persona made this session a noteworthy event indeed. My sincere thanks to Professor Dr. Noman Ahmed, Dean Faculty of Architecture and Sciences, and Professor Dr. Anila Naeem, Chairperson, Department of Architecture and Planning, for their help and support at various stages. Words are not enough to thank their constant guidance and support to shape the conference. Unmatched is the intellect of our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Sona Govind, our esteemed guest from Me whose speech definitely directed the dialogue of this conference. I'm highly grateful to all the international and national speakers whose intellectual input made this event a remarkable occurrence. This magnitude of event does not happen overnight. The planning begins months in advance. We are fortunate enough to have the support of extremely driven and committed faculty members, staff members, student volunteers at the Department of Architecture and Planning. I would especially like to express my gratitude to my co-conveners, Dr. Masuma and Dr. Rabella, for their unwavering support. I also like to thank Sarah Hafiz for her hard work, enthusiasm, and constant support. I cannot thank everyone, but I'm incredibly grateful to each and every one of the members for their participation and willingness to take on responsibilities that are outside their comfort zones. Furthermore, we would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our major sponsor, that was SIN HEC, our sponsors, Agro Foundation, and Mohammed Dada Minerals for sponsoring our souvenirs. Last but not the least, we are happy to mention our obligation to the press and media contacts and the service department, finance department, registrar office at the NED University, and the people related to technical arrangements. If time is money, then today you have spent millions for us. Thank you all for making this event successful. Thank you for being here. And now I would like to welcome you all for the refreshment that is served at the back. Thank you, everyone, and see you tomorrow. Souvenirs have been distributed. Yes, let's have a good day. Yes, please, everybody. This is given a noun mentioned here, and all the faculty members, please come on the stage and let's have a good photo, and then we'll head towards the refreshment at the back.